Hi
Hello.
there. How are you?
Hello.
Look at
I'm
this.
fine.
It's 8 o'clock exactly. That's like British punctuality. My
That's on
father and my
you.
mother would be very proud of me.
That's 100% on you, yes?
Yeah, so if hi, hello Alex. How are you?
Hello.
Yeah, so what are we here to talk about? We're here to talk about the question that many people who speak pretty good English think about. It's like, I want to be an English teacher. How do I go about it? Yeah, and it's sometimes a very difficult place to begin because it's often very hard to know how to go about it. Yeah, um,
Yes.
and I thought that perhaps it might be a good idea for us to both tell our story about how we became English teachers, because I think our stories, although they're very different, they do represent kind of two of the avenues in which people can begin to teach English. Yeah, and then we'll use that discussion as the basis for the other questions that we're going to answer about qualifications, the knowledge you need, how you find work, how you survive the first lessons, all those
hmm
of kins, and then how you develop further as a teacher. Yeah. So how did you begin teaching in Clara?
Well, in my case, like I imagine probably happens to many, many teachers, yeah. It was a bit of a happy coincidence. I used to study English at the school and I studied there my whole life up until I got the Cambridge First. And I decided, okay, this is good enough for me. I'm tired of English. I want to stop studying. Yeah.
How old were you?
At the time, I was 17.
Mm-hmm.
Then a couple of years passed, and I decided, maybe I would like to further learn a little bit more. Yeah. Maybe I'm not quite finished yet. So I went back to the same school where I got the Cambridge First, and they said, look, we don't have any more courses. Yeah, the Cambridge First was at the time at that school the top course they offered. But they said, for someone of your English level, we actually have a spot as a teacher. Would you be
Wow.
interested? And at the time, I was just starting college. Like every college student, I was broke. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, okay, that's going to be a good way to make some money while I work through my degree. And that's how I began.
Yeah, I think that's quite a common route, isn't it? You begin learning, you get to a quite a good level, and they start to recognize the owner of the school or the coordinator. They recognize your abilities, and then they kind of invite you to join. Yeah, I think many people who maybe are watching this recognize that path. Yeah. Um, my path, of course, was slightly different. Yeah, I'm a gringo. Yeah, so some people believe that gringos are born to teach English, but of course that's nonsense. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, I started teaching properly much later than you. I was always a kind of very altruistic kind of person. So very early on, when I was 16, 17, I kind of volunteered as a teacher, helping a teacher to teach immigrants. And that was a great experience, but I never took teaching seriously. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just helping out. And it was only much, much later, I think I was about 30 years old, after I did my degree in linguistics, I did my master's degree, and I was actually working as a computational linguist in Belgium and then in England. That I made the decision to move here to Brazil, and then here I am, the gringo. What am I going to do? Yeah, I didn't want to do computational linguistics anymore, so I had to make a decision, and I didn't really know how to speak Portuguese at that time. Yeah, 18 years ago. So I thought, okay, I'll teach English, but I'm not so arrogant as to believe that I could just simply teach English. Yeah. So I did the CELTA. I did a bit of practice teaching. I taught some academic English in a university in England before I came. And then I came here and I started teaching full time. Yeah. So very different routes for both of us. Yeah. But I think, many people have, yeah, gringo, exactly. I don't actually like the word gringo, but I know that most of the audience watching it will actually understand that word. Um, so yeah, you can get into teaching in many different ways. And I think the people watching here now, they're probably going to have either a similar or very different story because there's so many ways to get into it. Yeah, people who did degrees in languages, people who did degrees in other things, like your degree is in.
I am a psychologist.
Psychology, yeah. And, we knew teachers where we used to work together. We knew people who were biologists, lawyers, from all sorts of backgrounds, yeah. And we'll discuss a little bit later on about qualifications. What are the important things or not, yeah.
Mhm.
Now, imagine that you could travel back in time. There you are, your 17-year-old self. You could go into that room just before your first lesson. What piece of advice would you give yourself?
That's actually a very good question. I think when I was 17, maybe not, but as I got a little bit older, you start to become a little bit more self-conscious, yeah, because a 17-year-old is completely uh, they believe they can change the world. Yeah, absolutely. And that's how I felt. But when I became a little bit older and I started gaining more experience, I started to realize, yeah, how little I knew. Maybe I felt like, okay, I know English, but I don't know a lot about teaching. So I started feeling really small and I was really self-conscious of making mistakes in the classroom, doing things wrong, maybe conducting an activity that didn't work out or
Mhm.
saying things that were not accurate to my students. Yeah. So I would go back in time and I would tell myself, relax. Yes, you are going to make mistakes. Things are going to go wrong, but it's not the end of the world. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think I would probably not have believed myself back then, but I would definitely try to tell myself, that that's the way to go. What
Yeah,
about
because
you?
yeah, I was thinking because for me it's similar, but perhaps it would be don't be too proud to ask for help.
Mm,
Yeah, because I was much older, I was very experienced in my work. I felt that I knew a lot about language. Yeah, my work as I was a linguist working with artificial intelligence, so I knew all there was to know. But I knew nothing about teaching in reality. A CELTA barely prepared me for it, and I
mm,
think maybe at the beginning I was a bit too defensive because I had the weight of being a gringo on my shoulders.
mm,
Yeah, this weight. So it works in both ways. Yeah, in the same way that many people misguidedly believe that native speakers automatically make good teachers. I think some of that pressure reflected on me as well. Yeah. So I think admitting that I didn't know things, that I needed help, that would have saved me an awful lot of heartache. That maybe would have saved me like one semester of pain. Absolutely. Yeah. But do you think that being a good teacher is something you're born with, or can you learn it?
I think there are two aspects of being a good teacher. Yeah. The first one is related to people skills.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't think a good teacher can actually be a good teacher not having good people skills because we deal with people. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, unless we are empathetic, we are caring, we are loving in a certain way towards our
Yeah.
students,
Tolerant, patient.
tolerant, patient,
Yeah.
I think it doesn't really work. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, I nobody is like that off the bat. Yeah, those are definitely skills that maybe we might even have a little bit more than other people, but definitely they have to be developed because
Mm-hmm.
students
Mm-hmm.
are always pushing us. They are always testing our limits, and we're always finding out where our patient ends, how far we are willing to go with certain people. Yeah, so I think we're always learning.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, there's also the qualifications. Yeah, in the sense that not qualifications per se, but the theoretical knowledge, like you said, and I also said, yeah, when I first began teaching, I felt like the theoretical knowledge was something that, at least for me, was missing. I needed more. Yeah, so definitely over time, yes, across the years, I definitely managed to gather a little bit more of that theoretical knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
but it's never enough. We're always learning more. Yeah.
Yeah. Just looking at some of the comments there, people are saying things like, yeah, having those personality traits can help, but it does take some work. And none of us are born complete, are we? Yeah. As human beings, we're not complete, and so definitely as teachers, we're not complete. And the older you get, the more you learn from experience. As somebody also wrote, you cut your teeth by making mistakes, and that could be in the soft skills and also in the teaching skills, yeah, which are often intertwined, yeah. So yeah, I think we both agree that you're not born a teacher, absolutely not. Either personality-wise or skill-wise, both of these things have to be learned and developed, yeah. And as Fabrizio said, they were always learning. So the teacher I am today is not the teacher I was 2 years ago, for example. And I've learned a lot about myself and about my teaching method, my values, the things I like. Yeah. But okay, let's go to some of the kind of basic questions perhaps that people might ask. Yeah. A question that's really common is, what level of language, what level of English do I need in order to become a teacher? Yeah, what's your opinion about that?
It's a very pertinent question. Yeah, it's very, and I think many teachers, especially what you said about being a native. Yeah, I think it works the other way around for teachers who are using English as a second language, because we are always thinking we need to be perfect in order then to qualify as a teacher. So it all depends on the level of student you intend to teach, yeah, especially when you begin. So I think, generally speaking, a teacher needs to be at least one level above that of their learners, yeah. But of course, if people are really serious about teaching, I think it's only a matter of time until they decide, okay, this is not enough. I want more. I want more of myself. I want more for my learners. Yeah, because we also want to be good models. We also want to be references. And so I think as a starting point, one level above is enough. But I hope teachers don't settle for that.
No, I think it's always necessary to strive to be better. Actually, no matter what your level, if you're a C2 level, yeah, there's so much more language beyond C2. And part of the reason perhaps you teach is because you love the language, you like giving other people the opportunity to open those doors for them. And I think you could be a great model if you yourself are striving to be better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very, very, very important. But does that mean you need a language certificate in order to teach or not?
I think language certificates, they definitely help a teacher in the sense that it grounds us. Yeah, for example, for me, having a language certificate made me feel validated as a teacher.
So it's like self-confidence.
Exactly. But I don't think for learners that matters as much, so long as they know you and they trust you. Yeah, so I think it's more about rapport and building good relationships with your students and being honest. Yeah. And rather than you have to have a certificate in order to then qualify as a teacher.
Absolutely. I mean, you can have a vast range of knowledge about the language without having any certificate whatsoever because of the way that you've approached learning it for yourself. Yeah. I was talking to somebody today who never got a certificate, and his level of English was fantastic, and yet he still had this nagging doubt, like he needed to justify to himself that he had this level. Yeah. And I'm sure that if he did the C2 tomorrow, he would pass it like that. Yeah. Because, you know, it does give you validation, and as Nicole has just pointed out, it does give you a target, yeah, something that you can work towards. And I think having that target in mind, that you're working towards it, that is very good for giving you the discipline, the habit, because it's often easier to work towards a target than to kind of work in a vacuum. Yeah. And no matter where you go, you want to keep on learning because you love the language and that's why you want to teach it. Yeah.
Yeah. And as a
no, I just gotta finish. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that as a teacher who has gone through this experience of striving forward and trying to learn ever more, yeah, you will empathize with your students as well.
Yeah. Because I think maybe doing a certificate, because it's a more of a formal process, perhaps you might think more about the process of learning than you might otherwise. And that knowing that process of learning is crucial in understanding your learners. Yeah, very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what about perhaps specifically thinking of teaching qualifications? What do you think about that? Do teachers need those?
Yeah, what kind of things like the
For example,
TEFL or CELTA?
you mentioned the CELTA earlier, yeah? So do you
Yeah.
think, and I know in many countries, a CELTA is a mandatory step for anybody who is thinking of going into language teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here in Brazil, the CELTA has a funny status, doesn't it? Because it's designed as an entrance to teaching. So it's designed for people like me. Yeah, when I began teaching, I did an elongated 6-month version of the CELTA while I was working. And I had no idea about teaching. And so the idea was they would give me a step in. Whereas here in Brazil, it has this funny status. Yeah, people have been teaching very well for 5 years. The CELTA seems like a holy grail almost. Yeah, and part of that is related to the size of the investment and the amount of time. You know, if you do the month version, you need a whole month to do it. You're going to spend at least 6,000 reais. Yeah, and so that can present an obstacle to some people. But you know, it doesn't have to be the CELTA. There are many other qualifications and courses you can follow, which are not really as expensive or as time consuming. So you know, I think the CELTA is an excellent course because it does teach you to think more analytically about teaching and about language. Yeah, but if you've been doing that beforehand, if you're the kind of teacher who not only loves English but you love to think about teaching, and you've been watching those webinars and you've been reading the articles and following the news, then I think you can develop just as well. Yeah, the CELTA and then maybe later the Delta, they do provide very good milestones for you to do. For you to follow. Yeah. So in the same way that as Nicole was saying earlier about the language level, language certificates, aiming towards a formal certificate is actually a good thing because it gives you a drive, a discipline, a motivation. Yeah. But what about here there are those courses which are called licenciatura. Yeah, it's a bachelor's degree that allows you to teach. Do you think those are good things to have as well?
I think any experience with going to university or taking a course such as that, they're valid, they're very important. But rather than because of the licenciatura itself, I think it's more in terms of the human experience, of stepping out of an environment such as, let's say, secondary school and going into higher education, and then there are lots of elements which are part of higher education which are definitely not part of regular school life. And I think those things, when people are able to go through them and develop them, they are very important. Because it helps people, to my mind at least, it helps people become more independent learners. They don't need their professors as much. They don't rely on their professors as much. They start discovering pockets of knowledge that they might be interested in, and so they want to learn about those, and they decide to study things on their own. And I think this thirst for knowledge, as well as this ability to become autonomous, is very important. And you, as a teacher, we have to be able to teach that to our learners. But I feel that for us to be able to teach that and be successful in teaching that, we also need to have experience with being autonomous learners ourselves.
So in the same way that a Brazilian teacher teaching in Brazil is actually a really good model for the learners because they themselves have gone through the process of learning English and understand the difficulties and the challenges involved. In the same way, I guess if you're going to be thinking about helping your learners to become autonomous or how to finding ways that they can study regularly, then having gone through that yourself is also an important step. Yeah, is that what you mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some comment a little bit early on suggested that the reality is in Brazil that if you spend a month or 2 months abroad in an English-speaking country, you come back, it is possible to get a job. Yeah, and we know that it
Mhm.
is possible if you have an okay level of English, a B2 level of English. There are quite a few options for you to begin teaching. Yeah, but probably, to my mind, that's good that we can gain that entrance. Yeah, but perhaps
Mhm.
it's not something we should simply settle for. We should. I think we all have the duty to improve English language teaching and English language skills here in Brazil. And I think
True.
as teachers, we're in a perfect position to try and push that forward. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and
What about
I
living
think,
abroad? Yeah.
mm,
What do you
yeah,
think
that's
about that?
exactly
Is
what I
it
was going to
necessary? Sorry, go
ask.
ahead. Yeah.
Because as a foreigner, yeah, do you think, or have you had experience with um, perhaps teachers who have lived abroad versus teachers who haven't? And have you felt, decidedly there is an element of
No, I mean
quality?
I've hired and fired hundreds of teachers over the years. Yeah. And in terms of the hiring process, experience abroad was never a big thing, never.
Mhm.
Because living abroad, it can bring you advantages, but not necessarily because of English. It's because of your experience and the maturity that it can bring if you go to another country with a different culture. So it can enrich your experience as a human being.
Mhm.
It may actually give you a little bit of advantage in terms of your knowledge of English or your knowledge of more idiomatic English. But for me, that's not a deal breaker. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
some of the best teachers I know and the best English language users that I know have never lived abroad. Yeah. They may have spent a little bit of time abroad, a holiday here, a holiday there, but it's
Mhm.
completely unnecessary for you to have lived abroad in order to be a good teacher.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is
Mhm.
if you want to do it, it's awesome that you can manage that time to go abroad for 3 6 months. Awesome, and it's going to make you a better human being, but not necessarily a better teacher. I don't think.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm an example of somebody who has never lived abroad. Yes.
Mm, mm,
Well, practically all of my English was learned in Brazil. Yeah.
yeah,
At first through language schools and then on my own because I read a lot. I read a lot in English. Yeah. And
and
that
of all
caused
the all the all the teachers and all the English language users I've met over the years, you are by far one of the best. Yeah. So it really
Thank
wasn't necessary to. You're welcome. I'm telling the truth. Yeah.
you.
It wasn't necessary for you to live abroad. It really isn't. Yeah. Because
True.
how much culture do we teach in reality as well? That's the other thing. People often say, living abroad, you understand the culture better. But in today's
Mm.
world, your learners here in Brazil, the vast majority of their communication is going to be occurring with people who also use English as a different language, as a second language. So they're not going to have those common cultural experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you also have to question yourself whether teaching them about very specific customs or very specific habits is actually profitable. Depending on the
Mm-hmm.
profile of your learners, that's actually detrimental to their use of the language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely. And why does a learner need to know that many English people drink tea at 5 o'clock in the afternoon if they're going to be doing business with somebody in Japan or
mhm,
negotiating a study course in Boston?
mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
it gives you a bit of trivial knowledge maybe for the quiz night, but that's about all.
And as a gringo, as you said earlier, yes, you came to Brazil without knowing the language, you said. So,
Mhm.
do you think that a teacher needs to speak a learner's first language in order to be a good teacher?
Not necessarily. It depends on the context. Yeah. One of the very interesting things about my CELTA experience, not my Delta experience. My CELTA experience was the multilingual element. Yeah, there were people in my practice teaching groups that came from Czechoslovakia, Libya, Japan, and of course they were low-level learners, so there wasn't really much in common in terms of language. So the whole teaching technique is very different. And it's possible to do it, absolutely. But if you're in a monolingual context, I think knowing the learner's first language does help. And that's why in Brazil, most of the best teachers of English are Brazilian. Because you first, as I said before, you understand the challenges and difficulties of learning English from a Brazilian Portuguese perspective, yeah? But you also understand the common traps and difficulties. It took me 3 or 4 years to understand why a learner would say, I have 12 years. Yeah? Because they were literally translating from the Portuguese, because I didn't have that enough Portuguese yet to actually understand, and I was puzzled by it, and I would ask my colleagues, and they would try to explain, but I didn't experience it internally. So knowing the first language in a monolingual context, it certainly helps. Yeah, there are other parts. When I started teaching, I didn't know any English. Yeah, so my learners knew that. So there was perhaps an element that they had to make a bit more effort to help me understand. Yeah, in terms of using English. But at the same time, they were able to make comments perhaps about me or make little jokes that I wouldn't understand, and therefore there was an advantage for them. Yeah.
Sure. Knowing that you didn't speak Portuguese.
Yeah, but from your point of view, knowing the way you learned English, has it helped you knowing the learner's first language?
I think it does, but from a different perspective. Yeah. Nowadays, because as I told you before, I started teaching when I was 17, but I'm not 17 by far. Many years have gone by, yeah. And I've nowadays the level or the type of learner I teach is advanced learners. So often what happens to those learners is that they come into class believing that either they've reached as far as they can go and they're not going to be able to ever speak English as well as they would like. So they see people on television or their favorite shows and they think, okay, I understand everything, I know what they're saying, but I don't speak quite like that. I'm not as fluent or I'm not as good. And then when they are able to see teachers who come from the same background as them, yeah, who have grown up not speaking English, learned English later in life, and have been able to reach a certain level of proficiency, that can be an incentive. Yeah, that can be motivated for students in the sense that they look at you and they think, okay, if you did it, so can I. Yeah, there's this idea because often it can be dismissed. Yeah, you speak English well. But you're a native speaker, or you lived abroad, or students, they tend to dismiss this. And when you tell them, look, that is not true, that didn't happen, I'm just like you, and then they start looking at you differently because they think, wow, okay, I can do this too. So it can really be a push for them. Yeah, you have to, that's why it's important for teachers to be open and tell them, look, this is who I am. Yeah.
I think it's also good to kind of, even in the classroom, explain or demonstrate the difficulties you had with English, yeah?
Absolutely.
I prepositions are difficult things, and you can overcome them by doing this. My experience was I did this to help myself understand and learn better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just recap this little section, yeah? Because we were talking about qualifications and basic experience, yeah? So what we both agree is that in theory, you only need to be a level above your learners in order to be able to teach them. You don't actually need a language certificate nor a teaching qualification or even go to university, yeah? But all of those things definitely do help. And if you're a person who's serious about your profession, you want to make it into your career, you're almost obliged to help yourself develop. Yeah? So in my estimate, you need to be minimally B2 in order to really start thinking about yourself as a decent level for teaching the kind of 3 or 4 levels below that. But you should always be striving to go above that, C1, C2. Whether or not you have the certificate doesn't matter. But they can help you for motivation, to demonstrate your ability and to validate yourself. Yeah,
True.
and that includes the university and the teaching qualifications. Yeah,
Mhm.
but basically, any person who wants to make English their career, they're going to be striving for certification and knowledge wherever they go. Yeah. Okay. And I hope that people watching this kind of agree with that. And as a profession, I think you need to kind of take it seriously. If you're not going to treat it as a profession, it's perhaps a side job. You have a main job and you want to teach just for pleasure on the side. Okay, do it the way you're doing it. But if you really want to be serious and be taken seriously,
Mhm.
you have to kind of strive to be better all the time and have certain milestones and objectives for yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now we've said all this. But what about that person who's watching? Yeah. They have a good level. Yeah. They're a C1 or a C2. Maybe they have the certificate, maybe they don't. But they love English. They've learned it to a high level. They want to find a job. What the heck do they do? Where do you begin?
It's a tough one.
Well, I mean, the way you began was one option, yeah?
Exactly.
You
Yeah, I
get yourself
began through
noticed. Mm-hmm.
the school where I studied. Yeah, so within that environment, I was a student that um, excelled, and so they decided to take a shot and invest. Yeah, and I
Mm-hmm.
think in a
Mm-hmm.
way this happens especially with language schools. Yeah, uh, if they see people are interested enough.
Do you think that's more common in smaller language schools, like family run, rather than large institutions?
Perhaps,
Yeah.
because if it's a large institution, they might have a more of a bureaucracy, yeah, about
A more
this.
formal process, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
but then they might talk to you and invite you to do, for example, a teacher training, uh, or to go through some preparation classes to see whether or not you take
Mm-hmm.
to it.
Those people who are listening to us now, if you just want to type in the chat, but how did you begin? What was the avenue? Was it from a language school and you were invited? Did you find another avenue, perhaps? Because there are many ways. I mean, with any job, one of the issues is often a school requires experience, and you can't get experience until you start working. Yeah. So which comes first, the experience? Yeah. So finding the door, perhaps for some people, takes a long time. Yeah. It means walking around with your CV, talking to school owners, no, sending your application to a regular school. But I think probably here's an interesting story. Here in Curitiba, where I am now, they have about 4 international schools. I won't name any of them, okay, because I don't want to get into trouble. And I know somebody who was trying to put her children into one of these schools. And because she's a language teacher, she knows quite a lot about levels and requirements. And so she asked in each of the schools that she visited what level of English the teachers had. And almost without fail, every single one said B2, which kind of surprised me, yeah? But knowing that, an international school requires B2, that does suggest to us that there are many opportunities and doors that could be opened for potential teachers who might be listening right now. Yeah. I think B2 is actually a very, very good level for Brazil. Yeah. When we think that only maybe 4 or 5% of Brazilians are fluent in any kind of way, the higher you go, B2 is less common, C1 is much rarer, and C2 is like gold. Yeah. Like looking for diamonds. It's not that common. So I think if you have at least a B2 level, what should you be doing? You should be thinking about, I guess first you need to think about what kind of teaching you want to do. Yeah. What are the options? What do we have? We have working in a language school. What else?
You can teach privately.
Privately, which is often, again, it's often a starting point for many people, or a regular school. Yeah. A regular school that teaches English as part of their curriculum amongst all the other subjects. Yeah. What are the differences between those things, you think?
Well, I haven't got experience teaching in regular schools. Yeah, the only experience I have with regular schools is as a student. So honestly, I can't really say much in terms of what you need in order to uh, become a teacher there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the requirements by the government is that you have licenciatura. So
Yes.
you would need the language degree, letras, yeah, as we call it
Mm-hmm.
here, in
Mm-hmm.
English. And if you have a certificate like a B2, that helps an awful lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the thing is
Yes.
that the need for English teachers is so great here in Brazil, and there is a shortage
Yes.
of English teachers that I think thinking about a regular school is perhaps a good possibility.
Mm-hmm.
There are some
Mm-hmm.
advantages, yeah. What's an advantage to work in a regular school? The hours are perhaps a bit more family friendly,
Yes.
yeah. There's only occasional evening or weekend work, maybe on a Saturday when you have a training or you have an event, some
Mm-hmm.
kind of party for the school,
Mm-hmm.
and the occasional evening. But really, your hours are kind of during the day, early in the morning until mid or late afternoon. And so
Absolutely.
that can have a big advantage in terms of the regularity of your hours. Whereas a language school, what are the hours in a language school like in your experience?
Well, the language school tends to offer classes at alternative uh, hours. Yeah. So, for
Hmm.
example, for adults, yeah, usually the most popular courses are courses that are run in the evening because most people have time after work. So, a teacher who wants to teach at the school will probably have to be willing to work after 6, sometimes up until 10 p.m., depending on which city, depending on how many lessons are offered during the evening uh, period. Yeah. Also, many schools cater for children, very young children, who tend to study in the afternoon in regular schools. So they usually have classes when they're not at regular school in the morning, so early in the morning.
So it is possible, for example, if you're quite flexible, you work early in the morning with young learners. Maybe you'll start at 8 o'clock. If you're lucky, you might have lots of classes in between, and you go all the way to 9 or 10. But what does happen sometimes, you have a group here or there, or you have a little bit
Exactly.
of a gap, and then you teach the
Yes.
afternoon or evening. Yeah.
And something that's not popular at all, which is the for students, it's a very popular class, the Saturday class. Yeah,
Sure. Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So
So one
teachers need
thing
to
to
be willing to give up on
Mhm.
half their weekend if they want
Yeah.
to.
So yeah, you need to bear in mind if you're going to work in a language school, you might be working until Saturday late afternoon and then working again on Monday. So if you like weekends, it might be that a regular school is more appropriate for you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But there are other advantages and disadvantages related to private language schools and regular
Yes.
schools. Yeah. Class size is one example.
Yeah, in regular schools, you're bound to be teaching, depending, of course, on the size of the school, but many schools work with numbers such as 20 students, 30 students in regular schools. Yeah,
40, or depending
exactly.
if
Depending
they're
on
in
how
a
old
high
they
school.
are.
High school, you might get 40 to 60 students. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But in a language school, that hardly ever happens. So you have perhaps 20 students would be a really large group, but
Hmm.
that's not very common. 12 students tends to be a large group for a language school. Most groups are smaller than that.
Yeah. So they do demand different kind of techniques and kind of attitudes and towards the teaching itself. Yeah. A kind of
Yeah.
realistic approach to teaching large groups, perhaps even
And
mixed
it's
groups.
and it's also different in the sense that, for example, at a language school, you might not be with a student for the whole year. You might just be with them for 4 months, which is the period the
Hmm. Hmm.
semester lasts in most schools. Whereas in regular schools, you often have the opportunity to be with the same student from the beginning of that year to the end.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if you are somebody who really would like to see people grow, language schools might not be um, the best place in that sense, yeah, because you might
Hmm.
get a student um, this semester and then again in 2 or 3 years' time. So,
Although it is nice, yeah, you see a student when they're 7 years old, and then later they join you when they're 15, and like, wow, it's amazing what's happened, yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, thinking about my own experience, like, you know, a beginner teacher, I came to Brazil. So what did I do? Yeah. Clearly, I had some unfair advantages.
Mm,
And let's be honest about that. Yeah. So being a native speaker still unfortunately gives you advantages. And 20 years ago, 18 years ago, when I arrived in Brazil, I definitely had an advantage. But listen to this. This is an interesting story. I came to Brazil. I stayed in Sao Paulo for a while, but it was never the intention to live in Sao Paulo. I had already chosen the city from kind of exploring around. And that city was going to be Curitiba. Maybe because it's more European, the people are unfriendly, the weather is very cold, you know, just my style. But what did I do? Before I actually went, I took the phone book or the web page, found all the addresses. I sent my CV with a beautiful covering letter written in my bestest English, yeah, and sent them off. Did I hear from any of them? Two, yeah, two. And so, I mean, many language schools, because I was only applying to language schools, so they don't do letters and paperwork and post receiving them. They do. Brazilians are Brazilians. They like to see you. They like to feel you. Yeah. And so it was only when I actually came to Curitiba that I walked around a few places and got to meet the people that I was invited to join in some processes. Yeah. And in the end, I just joined two processes and I ended up just working for one school the whole time from when I arrived from the beginning of 2004 until when I recently left at the end of last year. Yeah. But I think that's probably the best advice. Okay. You have an okay level of English. You're pretty serious, you know, you want to try it out, get a bunch of CVs, choose the right time. You know, I think if you go at times which are very busy for the school, it may not be so good. So maybe it's a worthwhile kind of staking out the school a bit first to see when you get lots of students coming in and out. Normally, the person who is the coordinator or the owner is very busy at that time because that person has loads of things to do. They're welcoming students, they're dealing with enrollments, they're doing all sorts of things. Yeah. Wait a little bit until it quietens down and go in with a little paper with a nice.
I think you touched the microphone on your headphone, and now there's a little bit of interference.
How's that?
Okay, now it's better.
Okay, maybe I was getting too excited. Sorry.
Yes. Too Brazilian, yes?
That's my problem, absolutely. Yeah, so I think prepare for legwork. If you're thinking about teaching at a school, yeah, and choose when is the best time to think about that for a private language school, you think?
For language school. Well, I think you should consider not just the time, yeah, but also the period of the year, because often they will be looking for people towards the end of a semester or the beginning of a new one.
Yeah, so if a school the semester typically starts in February, for example, for most lessons, it will go until perhaps the end of June or the beginning of July, and then the semester will begin again at the end of July. So when are they looking? If they're organized, and then not all of them are organized, if they're organized, they're going to be starting the process perhaps in October and November, thinking about the following February. Yeah, they might be looking in May for July and August intake. So those are the optimal times. But of course, what happens is schools don't always find the teachers that they need. So they also have to do a second process that perhaps is the end of January or even the beginning of February or the middle of July. So it's probably worth going twice, yeah, in those periods.
Yeah, something that I think Alex mentioned way before when we were discussing is the issue that often within this niche of English schools, teachers have to deal with a lot of informality here in Brazil. Yeah, so that might be one of the reasons why, for example, when you mentioned paperwork, or actually when you mentioned sending in CVs, people didn't really respond well to that because maybe they're just not used to it. Things are done in a more informal way. Yeah,
Absolutely.
they meet someone. Would you like to be a teacher? Sure, and they're hired, kind of thing. So there's also
Yeah,
that aspect.
the owner likes to get a look at you, get a sense of you, and that is important, absolutely. Yeah, and then
Mm.
the CV will be secondary. Yeah. But what about if you want to be a private teacher? You just want to teach it
Mm.
one-to-one. How do you get started there?
Well, I think you have to go through perhaps word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Because it's really
honest.
common that you end up, like somebody knows that you teach English, perhaps your mother tells a friend, and then they realize, their son is wanting to learn English. So that's
Sure,
often the most common way to begin, yeah, through
it
connection.
is. Hmm.
And once you get
Yeah.
one or two, that tends to follow others. But it can be a bit
Yeah.
kind of drip, drip, drip. Yeah, nothing consistent. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but that is the most common way to start. Yeah.
It is.
In the old days, you would put up a little poster, yeah, in a place, private lessons, yeah, with the little bits of paper you could pull off, yeah, around
Hmm.
universities, for example. Yeah.
Yes.
But nowadays, social media is the place, yeah, a regular presence on Instagram or even on Facebook, so that
Hmm.
people know that you're actually teaching, that you're available. Yeah, you need to make
Hmm.
yourself attractive because it's quite a big marketplace for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the first step is letting people know you're doing it and sending out feelers to, excuse me, sending out feelers to friends and family members, kind of spreading, because word of mouth is often the best way, yeah? People trust what other people say,
Exactly.
yeah?
Yeah.
So,
And it goes back to what we said earlier in the sense of people skills. Yeah.
mm,
Because teaching is a profession where you deal with people, you are also going to be recommended by people. So, in a
mhm.
way, it's all of that trust that gets built up on uh, having learned from you, having had the experience of having experienced your knowledge firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what are the
So
questions?
let's imagine that, okay, a teacher goes through all of this and they start working as teachers. Yeah, they are now a brand new teacher, ready to start teaching their first lessons. Now, a very interesting question people often ask is, should I use a course book?
Should you use a course book? Yeah, let me find it. I have so many here, let me grab them out. Yeah, I think, should you use a course book? Yeah, it's backwards, isn't it? I just mirrored. Should you? I think if you're a beginner teacher, absolutely use a course book.
Mm-hmm.
You may not have a choice. In fact, if you work in a language school,
Mm-hmm.
there are a range of possibilities, but all of them are going to be using some kind of material. Yeah. Some language schools they kind of make you follow a script. You have no choice. Yeah. Lesson one is this. This is what you have to say. These are the words you need to say. You have to follow it. Yeah. Other language schools, perhaps a little bit more relaxed. They tell you the material that you're supposed to use, and then what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go through it and use the course book in the way that you feel is appropriate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're a new teacher, you don't have much experience, you don't have much notion about things that are necessary at certain levels, or the range of how to make your own range of materials, then a course book is definitely a useful tool. Yeah, it's like a little life raft. It's something you can hold on to because it guides you through the semester or the year. And but once you get used to using it, that's when you can start changing things. Yeah.
Expanding.
Do you remember when it was that you first started taking a course book and then started going and diverting from it? Remember how long after you've
Mm.
been teaching?
I don't think it's related to how long you've been teaching per se, because
Mm.
every time, for example, I teach right now, yeah, as years of experience, I have more than 15. Yeah, I've been teaching for quite some time. But every time I decide, or every time I start with a new level or with a new proposal in terms of a course for my students, I feel that the guidance of a course book is very important. Although nowadays, of course, because I am more experienced, I am not going to be following the course book, the teacher's book to the letter. Yeah, I'm definitely going to read the suggestions. I'm definitely going to go over the activities because I think it's a great source, especially to diversify, to remember techniques that maybe you haven't used in a while. But I always refer back to course books and the teacher's book because I think they are a key element, yeah. Otherwise, you're all the time, if you're going to completely forego course books, you might run the risk of being the kind of teacher who keeps inventing the wheel every class. Yeah. So I do think that as you grow more experienced, you grow more independent. And I think that should be the case because you start developing your own way of doing things. You understand what you're good at. You understand maybe the sort of activities that don't really go with your teaching style,
Or with the
but
students.
or if your students, absolutely. But completely foregoing course books, I don't think that's a good idea because there's such people study to put them together. They do research. Years of experience first go into putting a course book together if you're using good material. Yeah. So I don't think we should ever look at a course book and sneer at it as something that we don't need. Or at least that's how I view it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right now, course books in my teaching life, they're there as a reference and a resource rather than the vehicle of the lesson. Yeah. But I think a new teacher, the course book can provide incredibly important support.
Absolutely.
The teachers, but this live is not all about choosing the course book, but I think an important element is when you choose the course book, you should also be choosing the teacher's book. Because you do get some teacher's book and you open it up and it says, page 31, exercise 1, ask the students to do exercise 1, and then the answers. I mean, that's completely useless. You knew that.
Absolutely.
The best teacher's books, if you open them up, they will give you some ideas for pre-activities, things to do before you open the book, the kind of questions you can ask to stimulate the interest of the learners.
Extra activities.
Some excellent ones, they have extra activities, an optional activity that you can work on if there is time or you think your students will find that interesting. Yeah. So don't just choose the course book. Look at the teacher's book as well, because that's really, really important. Yeah. It's probably the teacher's book that is more important for a new teacher than the course book itself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so you got the job, your first private lesson, your first lesson in a language school. Imagine you go into a language school, you've got 8 people there. What's that like? What was your first lesson like? Do you remember?
I remember my first, I don't remember my first lessons at the first school I used to teach because I taught mostly adults and, adults are quite predictable or they, but I do remember teaching my first kiddie lesson, my first lesson for very young learners. And naturally, that was a great learning experience for me because I learned that there are other much better qualified, amazing people out there who actually enjoy teaching young learners. That's not me. Yeah, so
But that's the reality, yeah. In a private language school, for example, you normally, because you're very willing and you're enthusiastic to get the job, they say, how do you feel about teaching young learners? Fine. What about teenagers? Oh, no problem. Yeah. And then you end up teaching them.
Absolutely. Yes, that was my case. I went into a young learners class completely underprepared, completely unaware of what I was going to be facing. And when I finished the lesson, yeah, it was a 50-minute lesson. Thank God, it wasn't even, a longer lesson. Um, I felt like crying. I felt like, my God, this was the most horrible lesson I have ever taught. I can't do this for a whole semester. It won't work. And I went straight to that the person responsible for that level at the school where I worked, and I told her, crying, I was in tears. I said, we need to talk. And she was really, really kind. Yeah, she was awesome. She sat down with me. First, she calmed me down because I was literally crying. Yeah, so she calmed me down first. And she was very experienced and very knowledgeable about the level. So she talked to me about techniques I could use. I told her what were the issues I had. She shared with me some techniques I could use for the next lesson. She told me to come back to her and talk to her about this again so that she could help me out. Yeah. So it was a lovely experience in the sense that I felt really cared for and I felt supported. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that for new teachers, that's something very important. They need to have people around them, more experienced teachers who they know they can trust, and to, people they can run to, quite literally, because that's what
Mm-hmm.
I did. And so
So how
it
to, yeah, how to survive those first nerve-wracking lessons, and sometimes it's not just the first; it's the first dozen lessons. Yeah,
it's the
I
first
think,
semester.
yeah, what you're teaching in language school is making sure that you're open enough to go and ask questions, to ask for help, to ask for suggestions. The teacher's room can be a fantastic place for getting ideas for teaching because people teach the same levels. Yeah. Right now, because of the pandemic, perhaps less people are meeting in the teacher's room, but they still exist. Yeah. You can
Mhm,
reach out to them over WhatsApp or through a video chat. And I
mhm,
guess if you're teaching privately and you're having difficulties, again, there are many groups that you can ask questions to. There's a wonderful group, a Facebook group here in Brazil, which is BRELT, the Brazilian English Language Teachers Group. And it's awesome. So if you have a doubt or a question, saying, oh, I'm having this difficulty with this group, what can I do? You'll get billions of suggestions. So always reach out for help. Yeah. The
mhm.
same if the lesson goes wrong. Yeah. Something goes wrong.
Yeah.
You realize that things aren't working. You kind of have to work through it, don't you?
We have to be strong, yeah. If it's perhaps an activity that didn't go the way you wanted, yeah, we can't just abandon it, yeah. If you're an experienced teacher, there comes a time when you have enough knowledge and you can fall back on that experience so that you can come up with a new activity or you can come up with an adaptation. But if you're a new teacher, finish what you're doing, yeah. Perhaps after the lesson, you can take a calming breath, think about that lesson, try to find positive aspects of the lesson, and then for the aspects you're not very happy with, you work. Fabricio just sent there, plan again. Yeah. So for the following lesson, you think of better planning, you think of a different activity, you think how you can do that in a better way, and you keep testing. Yeah, over time you are going to accumulate a certain experience in order to be able to fall back on that. But in the
Yeah.
beginning, things will go wrong.
You can't always predict, can you? So you may plan initially, but because you don't exactly know what to expect, if something goes wrong, your
Exactly.
plan B, you may even find it difficult to predict what's going to go wrong because you've never experienced it before. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
But what's important is that you use that experience then later on in order to inform your next plans.
Absolutely.
I remember my first lessons here in Brazil because I was a kind of full-time teacher. My first lesson was teaching uh, middle teenagers, 13 years old, 14 years old.
Mm.
And they were very rambunctious and had lots of energy and they chatted. And I was terrified of them. I had no experience. In my teaching before, the CELTA was adult. When I taught at university, clearly university students. And I didn't really know how the teenage mind worked. So I was kind of forever frustrated And every time I didn't, it got to one point in the middle of the semester, my first semester, the class started, it was on Mondays at 2. Sundays, I would start worrying. And I would think, oh, I have that class coming. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And at that time, I didn't have enough confidence to ask for help. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't like I know what I'm doing. I'll be okay. It was like I was too afraid to ask for help. And so I suffered the whole semester. I suffered with this group. Yeah. And I left every single lesson, Mondays and Wednesdays, 2 o'clock until 4 o'clock. I left every single lesson thinking that was the worst lesson that ever existed in the humanity of lessons. In reality, it wasn't that bad, yeah. But there were some bits of the lesson that really got to me. And if I'd been able to take a step back because I had experience, I would have been able to say, well, okay, this was okay, this was okay, this was okay. The problem is this little bit, I'm not a bad teacher, I'm just having difficulty with this element that I don't have enough experience about, so I'll go and ask for help, yeah?
Yes.
So yeah, it's kind of trying, if possible, to step back away from your panic, your worry about it, yeah? That's really, really important.
Yeah. There were some comments here saying reflective teaching, yeah?
Yeah, I'm not seeing the comments anymore. I don't know what's going on.
For growth, reflective teaching is key, isn't it?
Absolutely. No matter how experienced you are, you can never go into a class thinking that you know it all, because you simply don't. Yeah. You may have taught the same lesson a million times, but you've never taught the same people a million times. People react differently. Times change, yeah, the way the attitudes towards a certain topic change over time. So maybe you taught it 10 years ago and it's fantastic, but now it's completely useless, yeah. So that cycle of reflection, so being the kind of person starting off as a teacher, you can get a big advantage if you start it like this, you know, you plan your first lessons, you get some advice, you get some help, and then after you've taught, you take a moment to think about the elements that went well, the elements that didn't go well, and try to think, what was it about the part that didn't go well? That was the issue. It could be one small thing. It could be your instructions. Yeah. It could be that the actual activity would work fantastically well for another kind of group, but not for the kind of group you have there in front of you. So they're all little small things, and your ability to reflect about what happened in the lesson is really, really important. Because that's the main growth factor, is your ability to reflect. And you know, regardless of what qualifications you have the CELTA, you do the Delta. If you're not able to reflect, you know, the money and the time you spent on the Delta, for example, is wasted. Because the essential element of these kind of qualifications is your ability to reflect and learn from your experience. Absolutely.
So, if people who are watching us here think, okay, I've learned something, but how can I go further? Yeah, how can I learn more about being a teacher? What would you tell them?
There are so many things where to begin, and you don't have to spend a single cent on any of it. Yeah, it's like the world is full of teachers and trainers who are desperate to give you their knowledge. You could spend a lifetime and never finish it. Yeah, you could start with websites. Yeah, there are the Teaching English website, which is run by the British Council. Yeah, packed full of ideas and resources for teaching. Yeah, and not just the actual lesson plans, but concepts, ideas about, for example, how and why you do a pre-reading activity. Yeah, ideas about project work or the flipped classroom, a whole range of different things. So there are loads of sites which have these really useful resources. There are also probably every day of the week there's a webinar somewhere in the world that's going to help you to teach. Yeah, we both watched one last week, didn't we, about motivation. Yeah, which is very interesting methods and techniques for motivating your students, and you can find them everywhere. There is even a Facebook group, I don't remember the name, but maybe I'll post it on Instagram, which is something like Webinars for Teachers, and you get a pile of webinars posted there that you can follow, and they're in all sorts of wonderful places. Yeah. So I saw one the other day and I thought, that's really interesting, I'd like to watch that, and then I saw the time was 2 o'clock, but then I noticed the time was Pakistani time.
Oh,
And that would mean me getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I thought, maybe I'll just watch the recording. Because that's the other great thing. Webinars are not just live, are they? They're recorded. You can watch them later.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where else? The IATEFL, yeah, the International Association for Teaching English as a Foreign Language, yeah. Every year they have a conference.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always possible to go to the conference because it's quite expensive, yeah, especially if you need to go to England where it takes place. But they do post most of the main sessions, the plenary sessions, for free on their website. So you get all these fantastic speakers. The list is endless. I can't see the comments right now, but are people making suggestions about other
Yes,
sources?
Fabricio just shared with us that he loves the BBC English website, yeah, which has actually very, very nice lessons. One of the most recent features they have, and which I really enjoy, are related to those 5-minute activities that students can do. And they are all divided or separated by level. Yeah. So I think that knowing about that, it's a nice way, for example, if you have students who say, teacher, I need extra listening practice, or I need extra. So this kind of short 5-minute practice activities. Yeah, I think they're very nice. Let's
And then
see.
the more you explore those, the more you begin to understand, as from a teacher's perspective, how they work, and you perhaps begin to incorporate the style into your own lessons. Yeah, if we're talking about reflective teaching and developing as a teacher.
Yeah. Alex just mentioned YouTube. Yeah.
Mm.
There are
How
many
many teachers
teachers.
there? Absolutely, not just teachers teaching English, but teachers teaching. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
talking about techniques. There are some even wild and wonderful videos. So if you know anything about the old methods, audiolingualism, Suggestipedia, the silent way, there are videos of those weird and wacky methods on the internet that you can watch. And there are actually some very interesting things you can learn from them. You may reject the silent way as a method of teaching, but the power of I'm sure Fabrizio is going to definitely agree with this one. Yeah, the power of silence in the classroom is something you can definitely learn from the silent way. Yeah, having that time for people to reflect and think about what they've just heard or they've just learned is really, really important.
Absolutely.
What about books? Do you think it's worth buying a few books related to teaching?
Well, if you are looking for books about teaching, yeah, we can think of a couple of very well-known authors that are a must, perhaps. No, not a must, but they are definitely quite knowledgeable, and I think their books tends to be really, really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the Jeremy Harvey. I have an old edition here, The Practice of English Language Teaching. I mean, the book I have is like the third edition, that thick. The latest edition is kind of that thick. It's full of stuff. Yeah.
Sure.
I'm not a great fan of Jeremy Harmer's style of writing, but he is seen as like one of the major authorities in English language teaching. I much prefer Jim Scrivener, yeah, who you also know, yeah. He wrote a great book called Teaching English, simple, yeah, but it's got really friendly, approachable language, all about all sorts of aspects of teaching. And the thing I really like about the latest editions is that they all come with a CD or DVD-ROM, yeah. Maybe these days it's downloadable video, I don't know, because who has a CD-ROM anymore?
Right.
But on that, there are lots of examples of real teaching methods, of either him, Jim Scrivener himself, or his associates, doing a little drilling activity so that you can understand how drilling works, or doing an example of elicitation, how you elicit in order to build up the understanding of a specific grammar point without even mentioning the grammar point to the learners. Yeah, so the Teaching English is an awesome book. Yeah.
And Nia just mentioned learning teaching. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. There are loads of good books. I think the Scrivener and the Harm are the two main. There's also I've forgotten his first name. Is it H.E. Brown? I can't remember his first initials.
I never
but he
know
did
his
the
initials.
principles of language teaching. There are so many.
Yes.
And then as you want to learn more and go into depth, there is material which specifically talks about those things. Yeah, whether it's there's a really nice book here. I don't use it anymore, but when I began teaching, it was like a Bible to me because it was all about teaching tenses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's backwards. It's called Teaching Tenses. Um, it's slightly old-fashioned now because it's quite an old book, but again, you're not going to be able to see properly. But it was full of little timelines. In
Mm-hmm.
those days, timelines were popular, yeah, in order
Yeah.
to help the students understand the time at which an event occurred.
Yeah.
And you could basically use those timelines in your
Teaching
classroom.
Unplugged, Fabricio just mentioned here.
Ah, that's for the
But
hardcore
maybe
teacher,
not
yeah?
for yeah, he said maybe not for novice teachers.
Yeah. Yeah, because so the further you go, the more specialized you want to become, and there are so many more
Absolutely.
avenues to follow. Yeah, but you
Absolutely.
can only know what interests you by doing as much as possible, by reading articles. There are so many websites with articles that you can freely
Mm-hmm.
download. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
there is a newish kind of social network called Freed, and it's Freed with three E's. And there's a kind of community of teachers, and there's one specific ELT community where people post tons of materials about teaching methods, concepts, but also lesson plans that you could
Wow.
download. So
Mm-hmm.
not knowing what to do is not a very good excuse, but there's so much of it, yeah? Perhaps knowing where to begin, because there is so much choice, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
I think starting off with one of those texts about general teaching, like the Scrivener, is a good place because then
Mm-hmm.
there are always references there that you can kind of follow and learn a bit more about that particular thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of coming to the end now, and I'm just wondering if there are any more questions. You're going to have to read them for me because I've stopped seeing the comments here. So
Okay.
if anybody has
Well,
any questions, think about it and add them to us. There was just one question that we got before,
mm-hmm.
which is about the weighting of qualifications. Yeah. So somebody asked me, which has more weight, a college degree or good certification? Yeah. And in the long term, which of those is more important? What's your opinion about that, Clan?
I really think it depends a lot on a teacher's objectives, a teacher's profile, where the teacher wants to work. Yeah, because as you mentioned, for example, if your focus, if your objective is to work for a regular school, you are going to need a college degree. If you want to work with very advanced learners, what we said before about teachers needing to be at least one level above those learners, yeah, you might need to study very hard, and you might feel better about yourself and also about talking to your learners if you have a certificate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I think it's a very tough question in the sense that a teacher needs to assess their own needs and see what is important for them. Um,
Yeah,
and
I would kind of say at the end of the day, they're all equally important, and you should at some
Mhm.
point be working towards all of them, but not all at the
Alex,
same time.
absolutely. Alex just said he has two questions. So
Hmm.
one, oh, let me
I
just
hope they're
read
not
this
too hard,
question.
Alex, otherwise I'll have to kill you.
So one is to me, okay, what's the hardest, what's the greatest challenge you've personally faced in your English teaching path? Wow, that's a
Mm.
very interesting question. Um, okay, I'm going to answer it in a moment. So let's see. Mm, what's the greatest challenge? I think when I talked about, for example, teaching children, yes, I think it was making the decision that because of who I am and because of my profile, I do not want to be teaching children. And I am not a very good teacher for children. So I think it's very hard for a person in any profession, to look at themselves and say, I am not good at this part of my job, or I'm not good at this part of what I'm doing. So of course, when people say, "Oh, you're a teacher," yeah, the word teacher and the fact that I'm female, often people associate with young learners, and so that for me was very difficult. to actually be able to recognize that within myself and to say, no, I really don't want to be the person I become when I am with a young learners class, because it makes me very stressed, it makes me very preoccupied. Because of my background as a psychologist, it might sound silly, but I worry a lot about the words I'm using, how I'm saying those words, whether or not I am hurting them or making them feel upset or making them feel. I worry a lot about those things. Yeah. And so for me, being in a young learners class was unbearable because I was always second guessing myself. Yeah. Should I say it this way? Should I say it that way? Should I try to make it lighter? It was really tough. So I think when I stopped teaching young learners, it made sense for me because then I was able to really develop as a teacher in doing what I like doing. Yeah, I really enjoy working with adults. I enjoy working with older teenagers. So that choice for me was one of the hardest things I had to do.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Do you think it was necessary to have that experience in order to make the choice, or do you think you kind of knew that anyway?
I was looking at the question just now. Can you repeat it,
Mm.
please?
Yeah, sure. You realized that teaching young learners was not for you.
Mhm.
Do you think it's important to have the experience of doing that wider variety of things in order to settle on what you do like? Or
I
do you think you should
wouldn't
trust yourself from the
I
beginning?
wouldn't have known. Yeah, I was never super comfortable with teaching young learners. Even when they asked me about it, I said, look, I have no prior experience. If you're okay with that, let's see where this goes. Right? But at the same time, I think had I not had that experience, I wouldn't feel as strongly as I do about the levels I teach because I have a
Mhm.
real passion about teaching advanced learners and helping people reach for those higher levels. Yeah. And perhaps if I hadn't had the experience of teaching young learners and seeing a whole different aspect of teaching, I wouldn't appreciate those aspects of teaching that are part of my job at the
Mhm.
moment.
Yeah, I think the inverse is true as well. I've worked with many teachers, and I remember one specific case of a teacher who didn't really express much interest in young learners, and she was
Mm.
asked to do a group because it was very common. Yeah, in a school, you're often
Mm.
asked to teach a variety of levels, and then she discovered a passion for it that she didn't know existed.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Okay.
inverse can be true. By trying different things, you can discover an underlying passion that you never knew was there. Or
Mm.
you could discover that something is really not for you, which in turn helps you to find a thing that really is
Mm-hmm.
for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Alex has asked two more questions. One of them is for you. So I'm going to read out
Hmm.
your question and then I'm going
Okay.
to answer his other question, okay, which was for
Awesome.
me. So what he's asking you is what is the thing that made you stay in Brazil?
That's really nothing to do with teaching, although it is to do with teaching. Related to teaching, yeah, I learned to be a teacher in Brazil. Brazil is what's given me my teaching career. I didn't have that before. As I mentioned at the beginning, I taught a little bit here, a little bit there, but my main profession was completely unrelated to teaching. And so Brazil has given me so much in terms of my identity as a teacher that I can never repay it really. But of course, that's not what's behind the decision to stay in Brazil. Yeah, thinking about my qualifications, I could go and teach up in the Caribbean or maybe some other equally exotic parts of the world. Um, but what came along with this idea of being founding myself, as a teacher, as a real teacher with real knowledge that I could share, that came with other things. It came with a kind of feeling of being respected that I really appreciate. And Brazilians are really good at showing respect. And I don't mean that like in a kind of yes sir kind of way. In terms of appreciation, Brazilians are fantastic at that. And I kind of found a place for myself here. I have a family here. I have a son that is kind of Anglo-Brazilian, and so my life is here. And I actually can't envisage, crazy though that may sound to some of you, I can't actually envisage going back to England because I feel I'm not really English anymore. Yeah, I'm kind of something in between, which is interesting and nice.
Mm.
Yeah.
You're a hugger.
Yeah, that's the other weird thing. Yeah, so people who know me, people who are in the live now who know me, do I hug? Yeah, annoyingly so sometimes. And you know, this was part of me as a person before I came to Brazil. Yeah, and that's not very English.
Mm.
And so you know, you can't go around hugging people in England. They kind of, I think you're going to assault them or steal something from them. And so, even in Curitiba, people do like to hug sometimes, which you know is really surprising.
Yeah. Well, we are Curitibanos, but we are still Brazilian, yes?
Absolutely, yeah. And what was
So
the question he
Alex,
had for you?
yeah, he asked me whether I have ever felt divided between being a psychologist and being an English teacher.
Wow.
And I think that's a very interesting question because actually it's my experience as a psychologist because I did work as a clinic psychologist for a few years, yeah, before I actually went fully into teaching. Even though I had already been working as a teacher part-time, as I said, because I was doing my degree and everything, I actually went into psychology for a few years and I decided to quit and go into teaching because I felt really restricted within the realm of psychology in the sense of the kind of relationships I could build with my patients. Yeah. And because I don't disagree with the ethics, all of the code that is behind what guides a psychologist's work, yeah, I decided I agree with this. I see why this exists. I will not break it. I will go into a different line of work. Yes, because I saw in teaching as a place where I could forge meaningful relationships. And to my mind, being a teacher above anything else, yes, above level, above qualifications, above skills, it's about inspiring people. Yes, you are not going to be a successful teacher unless every now and then you can't expect to inspire every student, but every now and then you have a student within whom you light a spark and they become more curious, more open, more interested in things in the world, in life, because they have met you or because they have crossed paths with you. And
Mhm.
so, to my mind, this is what is so meaningful behind being a teacher. And that's why, even though perhaps in the beginning, from my early experience, I was chosen by teaching, as I matured, as I developed as a teacher, I chose teaching as my profession. Yeah, so ultimately, it was a conscious choice rather than being chosen. Yeah, so I
I
do,
think
I that's it.
I think another aspect, similar aspect, is also the community of teachers that you get involved with. Yeah, some of the best human beings I've ever met were teachers, full of passion and compassion, caring about other people, people that you can learn an awful lot from, not just in a teaching perspective, but also from a posture towards life or a posture, an attitude towards other people that was really inspiring. Yeah, you know, I've worked with many teachers over the years, and I think that you know they're wonderful people, most of them. Yeah, you can really learn a lot from them.
Alex is saying
Yeah.
thank you for
Mhm.
sharing. He said he liked the live.
Yeah, thank you. So let's just wrap up. Yeah, I saw a comment here. I don't know your name, C.A. Souza Pereira, but students become teachers because of you. And that's, you know, we know people like that, don't we? Yeah.
We do.
Um, some of the teachers that I have worked with in the past have been my students previously. And it's not necessarily that I inspired them to become teachers, but perhaps they saw something in my teaching that they thought was valuable and that added to
Mhm.
the other ingredients that made them
Absolutely.
teachers. Yeah. So just to wrap up, yeah, we talked about qualifications, the necessary knowledge, how to find work, how to survive the first lessons. At the end of the day, remember at the beginning, we went back to our young selves at the beginning of teaching
Mm-hmm.
and we said, what piece of advice would we give to one another? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
another thing, what would we tell ourselves? Would we tell ourselves that it's worth being a teacher?
I would definitely say yes.
Why is that?
Because I'm an introvert.
Mm.
And I think being a teacher has really forced me to develop as a human being, become more of a people person, develop my emotions and my knowledge of self and my will to help other people in a way that perhaps if I was doing any other job, I would just have um, gone into my shell, my introverted shell, and not come out. And perhaps I would be perfectly happy. But I like to believe that the fact that I am a teacher has made me into a more wholesome human being. What about
That's very
you?
nice. Yeah, it's something. So I mean, I have many different experiences in work and life. I've lived in a monastery in Finland, as you know. I've worked with people with mental health problems. I've worked with stroke rehabilitation. I've worked with artificial intelligence. I've done lots of things. I felt all of them are really valuable, but none of them really kind of completed me. And I think teaching, that I've been doing for the last 18 years, is the one thing that brings everything together. Yeah, my intellectual curiosity, my love of language, my interest in other people. Yeah, and I'm kind of an ambivert. Yeah, so I have elements of me are extrovert, elements of me are introvert, and teaching allows me to be both of those equally well, and I don't have to worry about fighting one or the other. So I
Mm,
guess related to the question that Alex asked about Brazil, being a teacher and being in Brazil, I found my home where all of my attributes and my interests are kind of combined and joined together. And so I would tell my young self that, you're never going to regret being a teacher. Why the hell didn't you do it earlier, perhaps? Yeah. We've been talking for 90 minutes now, Clara. I think it's about time we had a drink, don't you think? Yeah, open a bottle of
absolutely.
wine. Yeah, we deserve
Absolutely.
it. I really want to appreciate everybody that stuck with us through these last 90 minutes
Thank
for
you.
your participation and your questions. It's been awesome. Um, if there are any questions that we didn't answer, then post in either of our Instagram accounts, and we're more than happy to help. And I just wanted to finish by saying this live that we're doing now, it's going to be the beginning of a series. The name isn't yet defined, but perhaps Friday Nights Live is a good idea. But I can tell you that next week we're going to be discussing not how do I become a teacher, but how do I become a young learner teacher. And that is with our friend Aninga, who was in the live earlier on. I'm not sure if she's still here, but she is a person who's very experienced in teaching young learners. So if that's an area of teaching that you're interested in, then I think you should join us again at this time next Friday, 8 o'clock. Yeah. And I just want to end by saying thank you so much for Clara. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you. It's
Thank
always a
you.
pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you. Same.
Okay. Okay,
It's
and
been
thank you
great.
everybody that stuck with us. It's been awesome. This is our first live, so we were pretty terrified at the beginning of it, but it's with your friendly questions and your little hearts, it's made all the difference. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good night everybody. Have a lovely holiday, and I hope you stay safe. Okay, bye bye.
Bye.